The Galactic Concord had existed for 12,000 cycles. It was a union of peaceful species from across the galaxy, bound together by treaties and shared values. They believed in cooperation, in trade, in the gentle exchange of ideas. War was something they read about in ancient history texts. A barbaric practice left behind long ago. High Coordinator Thelvos stood in his private chamber aboard Station Corrales, reading the report for the third time. His thin, translucent fingers trembled slightly as he scrolled through the data. A new species had been discovered in the outer spiral arm of the galaxy. They called themselves humans, and they had just achieved faster-than-light travel. The probe had gathered extensive information. The humans came from a planet called Earth, a world that made Thelvos uncomfortable just reading about it. The planet had extreme temperature variations, violent weather patterns, and an atmosphere that would be considered toxic by Concord standards. Yet somehow, life had flourished there. More than flourished, it had evolved into something remarkable. Thelvos set down the report and walked to his window. The stars stretched out before him, countless points of light, representing worlds he would never visit. Somewhere out there, the humans were taking their first steps into the galaxy. It was his duty to welcome them. On Earth, Ambassador Linda Carter sat in her office at the United Nations building, staring at a screen that displayed symbols she could not read. The message had arrived 3 hours ago, transmitted through channels that should not have existed. First contact. After centuries of wondering if humanity was alone in the universe, the answer had finally come. She was 52 years old. With gray hair she refused to die, and lines around her eyes that spoke of decades spent in difficult negotiations. She had brokered peace deals in the Middle East, negotiated hostage releases in South America, and talked down dictators who had their fingers on nuclear buttons. None of that had prepared her for this. The translation software finally finished its work. The message was an invitation. The Galactic Concord wished to meet with representatives of humanity to discuss peaceful relations and possible membership. Coordinates were provided for a station called Corrales, along with a date that translated to roughly 6 weeks from now. Linda picked up her phone and made the call that would change human history. Captain Samuel Hayes learned about the mission while eating breakfast in the mess hall of the Horizon's Edge. His ship was humanity's most advanced deep space vessel, designed for exploration and long-range travel. He was a practical man, more comfortable with engines and star charts than with politics and diplomacy. His second in command, Lieutenant Commander Patricia Webb, handed him the orders. He read them twice, then looked up at her with raised eyebrows. "They want us to carry a diplomatic team to meet aliens," he said. "Yes, sir. Real aliens. Not a drill. Not a simulation." "Yes, sir." Hayes set down his fork. His appetite had suddenly vanished. "How long do we have to prepare?" "The ambassador arrives in 3 days. We depart in 4. He nodded slowly, his mind already racing through the hundreds of things that needed to be done. The ship would need to be inspected from top to bottom. The crew would need briefings. Supplies would need to be checked and rechecked. And somehow, he would need to figure out how to keep his people calm when they were about to make first contact with extraterrestrial. "Life better get started then," he said. "Ambassador." Carter arrived with a small team of advisors and a mountain of luggage. Hayes met her at the docking bay, surprised to find a woman who looked more like someone's grandmother than a diplomat sent to represent all of humanity. "Captain Hayes," she said, shaking his hand firmly, "thank you for having us aboard, Ambassador. We've prepared quarters for you and your team on Deck 3. Excellent. I'd also like a tour of the ship when you have time. I find it helps to know the layout of wherever I'm staying." Hayes found himself liking her immediately. She was direct and practical, with no pretense or ceremony. Over the following days, as the Horizon's Edge made its way toward the coordinates provided by the Concord, he came to respect her even more. She spent hours studying everything humanity knew about the Concord species. The Volanthi were tall and willowy, with skin so thin you could see their organs beneath it. The Mortith were shorter and stockier, covered in thick gray hide that protected them from their homeworld's harsh conditions, The Kathrani resembled a cross between birds and lizards, with sharp beaks and feathered scales. None of them looked very sturdy. Lieutenant Commander Webb observed one evening, looking over the ambassador's shoulder at the images. "No," Carter agreed. "They don't. It makes you wonder how they survived long enough to develop space travel." Carter had wondered the same thing. The answer, she had come to realize, was that they had not survived the way humans had. They had evolved on gentle worlds, with stable climates and few predators. They had never needed to be sturdy because they had never faced the challenges that had forged humanity. The journey took 3 weeks. During that time, the crew of the Horizon's Edge tried to prepare for every possible situation. They ran drills for hostile contact, even though the invitation had emphasized peace. They practiced first contact protocols that had been written by people who had never actually met an alien. They studied language and culture and customs, trying to absorb in weeks what would normally take years. Sergeant Daniel Grant led the small security detail assigned to protect the ambassador. He was a quiet man, competent and professional, with a gift for remaining invisible until he was needed. He spent most of the journey reviewing potential threats and preparing contingency plans. Chef Kevin Moore was brought aboard at the ambassador's request. If there were to be diplomatic dinners, she wanted someone who could handle food preparation. Moore was excited about the prospect of cooking with alien ingredients, though he privately worried about accidentally poisoning everyone as they approached Station Corrales. The crew gathered at the observation windows to get their first look. The station was enormous, a sprawling structure of silver metal and glowing lights that hung in space like a mechanical flower. Hundreds of ships were docked around its perimeter, more variety in design than humanity had ever imagined. Captain Hayes stood on the bridge, watching the station grow larger in the view screen. His hands were steady, but his heart was racing. "This is it," Ambassador Carter said, stepping up beside him. "Everything changes now. Are you nervous?" he asked. She smiled slightly, terrified. "But that's never stopped me before." The comm system crackled to life. A voice speaking in a language that sounded like wind chimes came through, followed immediately by an automated translation. "Human vessel Horizon's Edge, you are cleared for docking at Bay 17. Welcome to Station Corrales. The Galactic Concord greets you in peace." Hayes took a deep breath. "Here we go," he said, and began the docking procedure. None of them knew that the next few days would turn everything they thought they knew
out there place in the universe
completely upside down. They were about to discover that humanity was far more terrifying than they had ever imagined, and the galaxy was far less prepared for them than anyone could have. Guessed at the docking clamps engaged with a soft thud that echoed. Through the Horizon's Edge, Captain Hayes watched. The status lights turned green one by one, confirming that the seal was secure. They were now physically connected to an alien space station, breathing the same recycled air as beings from dozens of different worlds. Ambassador Carter gathered her team in the main airlock. She wore her formal diplomatic uniform, dark blue with silver trim, pressed and perfect. Sergeant Grant stood behind her with 2 other security officers, their weapons hidden beneath their jackets. They had agreed not to appear armed, but none of them were foolish enough to go in completely defenseless. "Remember," Carter said, addressing the group, "we are guests here. We smile, we nod, we do not make any sudden movements. If something goes wrong, we stay calm and let me handle it." Lieutenant Commander Webb would remain on the ship with most of the crew, ready to provide support if needed. Captain Hayes had insisted on accompanying the ambassador personally. Despite her protests that he was more valuable on the bridge, "Something happens to you," he had said, "I need to be there to get you out." The airlock doors opened with a soft hiss. Beyond them lay a corridor of smooth white metal, lit by panels that glowed with a gentle blue light. The air smelled strange, like flowers and electricity mixed together. They walked forward in single file, their footsteps echoing in the silence. At the end of the corridor, a larger door stood waiting. As they approached, it slid open to reveal the reception hall. Carter had studied the images, but nothing had prepared her for the reality. The hall was vast, easily the size of a football field, with ceilings that stretched up into shadow. Hundreds of alien beings filled the space, their various forms creating a living tapestry of diversity that made her head spin. She saw Velanthi standing in small groups, their translucent skin shimmering under the lights. Mordeth clustered near the walls, their gray bulk making them look like living boulders. Kithrani perched on elevated platforms, their feathered heads turning to track the human delegation as it entered. At the far end of the hall, a raised platform held a single figure. High Coordinator Thelvos rose from his seat as the humans approached, his long limbs unfolding with careful grace. He was taller than Carter had expected, nearly 8 feet. With skin so thin, she could see the blue pulse of his circulatory system beneath it. "Ambassador Carter," he said, his voice translated through a device attached to his collar. "On behalf of the Galactic Concord, I welcome you and your people." Carter smiled and inclined her head. "High Coordinator, on behalf of humanity, I thank you for this invitation. We are honored to be here." The formalities continued for several minutes. Names were exchanged, pleasantries offered. Carter felt the eyes of hundreds of aliens upon her, curious and watchful. She kept her smile in place, her posture relaxed, her voice calm and measured. Then Sergeant Grant sneezed. It was a small sneeze, as sneezes go. Grant had allergies, and something in the station's air had irritated his sinuses. He turned his head, covered his mouth with his elbow, and released a sharp, explosive sound that echoed through the reception hall like a gunshot. The effect was immediate and dramatic. 3. Velanthi collapsed where they stood, their thin bodies crumpling to the floor like puppets with cut strings. A Kithrani ambassador shrieked and dove behind a decorative fountain, her feathered crest standing straight up in alarm. The Mordith went pale beneath their gray hide, something Carter would not have thought possible. Throughout the hall, aliens scattered in every direction. Some fled toward the exits. Others dropped to the ground and covered their heads. Several began making sounds that the translation devices rendered as prayers to various deities. High Coordinator Thelvos took 3 rapid steps backward, his enormous eyes wide with terror. "What was that?" he demanded, his voice barely above a whisper. "What did he do?" Carter stood frozen, her mind racing to understand what had just happened. She looked at Grant, who seemed equally confused, his face red with embarrassment. "I apologize," Grant said. "It was just a sneeze. I have allergies." The word did not translate. The Concord species had no equivalent concept in their languages. "He is unwell?" Thelvos asked, pressing himself against the platform behind him. "Is he dying?" No, Carter said quickly, raising her hands in what she hoped was a calming gesture. "It is perfectly normal. Humans sneeze all the time. It is how our bodies expel irritants from our respiratory systems." Thelvos stared at her. Around the hall, aliens who had not fled were slowly picking themselves up off the floor, still watching the humans with expressions of naked fear. "Your bodies," Thelvos said slowly, "violently expel substances through explosive force. And this is normal?" "Yes, completely normal. It happens several times a day for some people." The High Coordinator looked like he might faint. Carter could see his thin hands trembling. Perhaps, she suggested, we should take a short break before continuing. The break stretched into 2 hours. Medical teams were called to tend to the Velanthi who had collapsed, though they turned out to have only fainted from shock. The Kithroni ambassador had to be coaxed out from behind the fountain, and even then she refused to come within 20 feet of any human. Captain Hayes found Carter in a small room off the main hall, sitting alone with her head in her hands. "That could have gone better," he said. "I don't understand what happened," she replied, looking up at him. "It was just a sneeze." Hayes sat down across from her. "I've been talking to some of the station's staff. Apparently, most Concord species have completely silent immune responses. They don't cough. They don't sneeze. They don't vomit. Their bodies either handle infections quietly or they die." Carter absorbed this information. So when Grant sneezed, they thought ... They thought he was either dying or attacking. Maybe both. She closed her eyes and rubbed her temples. This is going to be harder than I thought. Over the next several hours, Carter worked to repair the damage. She met with Thelvos privately and explained human biology in more detail. She described how the human immune system functioned, how sneezing and coughing were defensive mechanisms, designed to protect the body from harm. Don't sing a quotes. Voss listened with growing disbelief. You are telling me, he said, that your bodies regularly engage in violent defensive actions, that this is considered healthy? Yes. We also have fevers, where our body temperature rises to kill infections, and our blood clots when we are cut, sealing wounds automatically. The High Coordinator sat back in his chair, his expression troubled. Ambassador Carter, I must be honest with you. What you are describing sounds less like biology and more like a weapon. Carter did not know how to respond to that. She had never thought of her own body as a weapon before as the day wore on. She began to realize that this was just the beginning of their problems. The Concord had invited humanity to a peace meeting, expecting to meet a species like themselves, gentle, fragile, harmless. Instead, they had gotten something else entirely. They had gotten humans, and humans, Carter was starting to understand, were far stranger and more frightening than she had ever realized. The formal peace talks began the morning after the sneezing incident. Ambassador Carter had spent most of the night preparing, going over notes and strategies while trying to ignore the knot of anxiety in her stomach. She had negotiated with terrorists and dictators, but none of them had been as unpredictable as this situation. The conference room was circular, seats arranged around a central table. Holographic displays floated above the surface, showing translations and documents in multiple languages. Representatives from all 12 Concord species were present, though many of them had chosen seats as far from the human delegation as possible. High Coordinator Thelvos called the meeting to order. We will begin with introductions and proceed to preliminary discussions of trade and cultural exchange. Carter nodded and stood to address the room. On behalf of humanity, I want to thank you all for this opportunity. We come in peace, seeking friendship and understanding with the peoples of the galaxy. She spoke for 10 minutes about Earth, about human history, about their hopes for the future. She emphasized humanity's desire for peaceful coexistence, their curiosity about other cultures, their willingness to learn and grow. When she finished, there was a long silence. Then a Mordeth representative raised his hand. Ambassador Carter, we have reviewed the data collected by our probe. We have some questions about your species. Of course. Please ask. The Mordeth pulled up a holographic image of Earth. Your planet has extreme temperature variations. Some regions exceed 40 degrees Celsius while others fall below -40. How do your people survive such conditions? Carter smiled. We adapt. We build shelters, wear appropriate clothing, develop technologies to regulate our environment. Humans have lived in every climate on Earth, from deserts to polar regions. A murmur ran through the room. The Mordath made notes on a small device. A Velanthi delegate spoke next. We noticed that your planet has significant seismic activity. Earthquakes, volcanic eruptions. Do these not pose a threat to your civilization? They can be dangerous, yes. We have lost cities to earthquakes throughout our history, but we rebuild. We learn from each disaster and develop better building techniques, better warning systems. Another murmur, louder this time. Akithrani leaned forward. Your planet has a single large moon that exerts gravitational influence on your oceans, causing them to rise and fall daily. This does not concern you? Carter paused. We call them tides. They are completely normal to us. Some of our coastal cities are built to accommodate them. The Kithrani made a small sound of distress and sat back in her chair. The questions continued. Each answer seemed to increase the tension in the room rather than reduce it. Carter could not understand why until Lieutenant Commander Webb yawned. It had been a long night for all of them, and Webb had been running on minimal sleep. The yawn escaped before she could stop it, her jaw stretching wide, her teeth exposed in what she thought was a harmless display of fatigue. The Velanthi trade minister collapsed. This time, Carter moved quickly. She gestured for Webb to stay back and rushed to the fallen alien's side, calling for medical assistance. But as she knelt beside the minister, she realized that the entire room had gone silent. Every alien was staring at Webb with expressions of pure horror. What did she do? Someone whispered. Her jaw. Did you see her jaw? It opened so wide. And the teeth. Did you see the teeth? Medical personnel arrived and carried the minister away. Carter stood slowly, her mind racing. She turned to face the room. I apologize for the disturbance. Lieutenant Commander Webb meant no harm. She was simply yawning. It is a sign of fatigue in humans. Thelvos had pressed himself against the wall. Your jaw? He said to Webb. It unhinged. It did not unhinge, Carter said carefully. It merely opened. Humans can open their mouths quite wide. And the teeth? Those are for eating? Carter hesitated. This was dangerous ground. Yes, humans are omnivores. We eat both plants and meat. The room erupted into chaos. Several delegates fled. Others began speaking rapidly in their own languages, the translation devices struggling to keep up. Words like predator and danger and death world floated through the noise. It took nearly an hour to restore order. When the meeting finally resumed, the atmosphere had changed completely. The aliens no longer looked at the humans with curiosity. They looked at them with fear. Captain Hayes laughed at lunch. They had gathered in a small dining area, trying to decompress after the disastrous morning. A Mordith engineer had been assigned as their guide, and he had attempted to tell a joke to ease the tension. It was not a very good joke, but Hayes had laughed anyway. Trying to be polite, the sound echoed through the room like the bark of a large animal. The engineer dropped his tray and ran. Other aliens in the dining area scrambled for the exits, leaving their meals behind. Hayes stood alone in the middle of the room, his mouth hanging open. What did I do? Carter pinched the bridge of her nose. I think you scared them. By laughing? Apparently laughter sounds threatening to them. They do not have an equivalent expression. Hayes sat down heavily. This is impossible. Everything we do scares them. How are we supposed to negotiate a peace treaty when they run away every time we yawn or laugh or sneeze? It was a good question, and Carter did not have an answer. The dinner reception that evening was their last chance to salvage the mission. Chef Moore had worked with the station's food preparers to create a menu that would be acceptable to both humans and aliens. The meal was laid out on a long table, dishes from a dozen different worlds. Moore walked along the table, examining the offerings. He picked up a small purple fruit and took a bite. Curious about the flavor across the room, a Valanthi diplomat made a choking sound. Stop him. Someone stop him. Carter turned. What is wrong? That fruit. It contains compounds that would kill any known species within seconds. The toxic concentration is lethal at any dose. Moore looked at the half-eaten fruit in his hand. Really, it tastes like a plum. He took another bite. 3 diplomats had to be escorted from the room. Carter spent the rest of the evening explaining that humans had evolved. Resistance to countless toxins that would be deadly to other species. Caffeine, alcohol, capsaicin, theobromine. The list went on and on. What was pleasure to humans was death to most of the galaxy. By the time the dinner ended, she was exhausted. She returned to the horizon's edge and collapsed into a chair in her quarters, staring at the ceiling. How do we fix this? She asked no one in particular. How do we convince them that we are not monsters? The answer, she feared, was that they could not. Because in the eyes of the galaxy, that was exactly what humans were. High Coordinator Thelvos called an emergency session of the Concord Council. The human delegation was asked to wait aboard their ship while the member species discussed what to do about their unexpected guests. The council chamber was filled with representatives from all 12 worlds, their voices overlapping as they shared their observations and fears. The atmosphere was tense, charged with an energy that Thelvos had not felt in centuries of peaceful governance. They are predators, the Mordith representative insisted. His gray bulk hunched forward in his seat. Everything about them suggests they evolved as apex hunters. The forward-facing eyes for tracking prey, the teeth designed for tearing flesh, the muscular structure optimized for pursuit and combat. It is worse than that, a Valanthi delegate added, her thin voice trembling. I have reviewed their planetary data in detail. Their world is a death trap. The atmosphere contains levels of oxygen that would be toxic to most species. The weather patterns include electrical storms, hurricanes, and temperature extremes that would destroy our cities, and yet they thrive there. They call it home. A Kithroni scientist stood and activated a holographic display. Images of Earth appeared, showing its diverse and dangerous ecosystems. Their oceans contain creatures with teeth longer than my arm. Their forests are filled with venomous insects and predatory mammals. Their deserts can reach temperatures that would cook our flesh, and their polar regions would freeze us solid in minutes. She paused, letting the images speak for themselves. And the humans live in all of these places. They do not merely survive, they dominate. Tell them about the hunting, someone called from the back of the chamber. The Kithrani nodded grimly. The ambassador mentioned something called persistence hunting. I researched it further. Early humans would select prey and pursue it for hours, sometimes days. They would not try to catch it through speed. They would simply follow it, never stopping, never resting, until the prey collapsed from exhaustion and died of fear. Many of the delegates looked ill. They are monsters, a small voice whispered. We have invited monsters into our midst. Thelvos raised a hand for quiet. There is more that you should know. I spoke with the ambassador privately after the reception. She told me things about human biology that disturbed me greatly. He stood and walked to the center of the chamber, his long limbs moving with deliberate slowness. Humans can survive the loss of limbs. If an arm or leg is removed, they do not die. Their bodies seal the wound, and they continue living. Some of them have prosthetic replacements and function almost normally. Gasps echoed through the room. Humans can survive the loss of major organs. They have 2 kidneys and can live with 1. They have been known to survive partial liver removal as the organ regenerates itself. Their bone structure repairs after breaking. Their skin heals after being cut. How is that possible? The Mordeth representative demanded. I do not know. But it explains why they are so calm in situations that would terrify us. They have evolved to survive catastrophic damage. Pain and injury are simply inconveniences to them, not existential threats. A young Valanthi delegate raised her hand. High Coordinator, I have been researching their cultural practices. What I found was deeply troubling. Please share it. The young delegate stood nervously. Humans engage in recreational activities that would kill any of us. They climb mountains where the air is too thin to breathe. They dive into deep water where the pressure would crush our bodies. They jump from aircraft for entertainment, trusting fabric canopies to slow their fall. She pulled up more images on the display. They also consume substances that are toxic to most life forms. Alcohol is a cellular poison that damages brain tissue, yet they drink it regularly at social gatherings. Caffeine is a stimulant that would stop the hearts of most species, yet they consume it every morning. Capsaicin, the compound that makes peppers hot, causes pain and inflammation, yet they add it to their food for flavor. The chamber was completely silent now. They are immune to poisons that would kill us. They heal from wounds that would end us. They pursue prey until it dies from fear. And they do all of this while smiling and laughing and calling themselves peaceful. The Mordeth representative slammed his fist on the table. We must send them away. We cannot allow such dangerous creatures into the Concord. I disagree, another voice said. All eyes turned to the speaker. It was Coordinator Velrath of the Kithrani, an elderly female whose feathered crest had faded to gray with age. She rose slowly from her seat. I have listened to everything that has been said. I have seen the fear in this chamber. But I have also watched the humans these past days, and I have noticed something that none of you have mentioned. She walked to the center of the chamber, her movements slow and deliberate. The human ambassador has been nothing but gracious since she arrived. When her subordinate caused a disruption, she immediately moved to help those who had fallen. When questions were asked about her world, she answered honestly, without boasting or threatening. When the dinner reception descended into chaos, she spent hours explaining and apologizing, trying to make us feel safe. Velrath turned to face the assembly. The human captain has kept his crew under strict discipline. They have made no aggressive moves, issued no demands, demonstrated no hostility. When the engineer ran in fear from the captain's laughter, the captain sat down quietly and waited for guidance rather than pursuing or challenging. "What is your point?" the Mordeth representative demanded. "My point is this. We have spent these days cataloging everything that makes humans dangerous. But we have not asked ourselves why such dangerous creatures would choose to be gentle." She let the question hang in the air. Think about it. These beings come from a death world. They have evolved to be the ultimate survivors, capable of enduring pain and damage that would destroy any of us. They could have arrived with weapons and demands. They could have taken what they wanted by force. Instead, they sent diplomats. They asked for permission. They apologized when they frightened us. High Coordinator Thelvos nodded slowly. He had been thinking similar thoughts. Coordinator Velrath raises an important point. The humans have shown us their capabilities through their biology, but they have shown us their intentions through their actions. And their actions have been consistently peaceful. "For now," the Mordeth representative muttered. "Yes, for now. But is that not true of all of us? Peace is always a choice, renewed moment by moment. The question we must answer is not whether the humans could be dangerous. The question is whether we believe they choose not to be." The council debated for hours more. Arguments were made on both sides. Some delegates insisted that the humans were too great a risk, that their very existence threatened the stability of the Concord. Others agreed with Velrath, suggesting that humanity's choice of peace was more meaningful precisely because they had other options. In the end, Thelvos called for a vote. "We will now decide whether to continue negotiations with the WHO." Man delegation. All in favor of proceeding? 7 hands rose. 7 worlds chose to give humanity a chance. All opposed? 5 hands rose. 5 worlds remained afraid. It was enough. The motion carried. Thelvos felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He did not know if they had made the right decision, but he believed deep in his heart that the humans deserved the opportunity to prove themselves. He sent a message to the horizon's edge, asking Ambassador Carter to return to the station. It was time to see what kind of future they could build together, Ambassador. Carter received the summons in her quarters aboard the horizon's edge. She had been staring at the wall for the past hour, trying to figure out how to salvage a mission that seemed completely lost. When the message arrived asking her to return to the station alone, she felt a strange mix of hope and dread. Captain Hayes insisted on accompanying her, but she refused. "They asked for me alone," she said. "If I bring security, it will look like I do not trust them. And if it is a trap, then you will need to be here to get our people home safely." She placed a hand on his arm. "I have spent my whole life talking to people who are afraid or angry or dangerous. This is what I do, Samuel. Let me do it." Hayes looked at her for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. "Be careful. I always am." The walk through the station corridors felt longer than before. Carter moved slowly, giving herself time to think, to prepare. She did not know what was waiting for her in the council chamber, but she knew that the next hour would determine the future of humanity's relationship with the galaxy. The doors slid open. The chamber was full, every seat occupied by representatives of the 12 Concord species. They watched her enter with expressions that were harder to read than before. Some still showed fear, but others showed something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or respect. High Coordinator Thelvos stood at the center of the chamber. He was alone, having stepped down from his elevated platform to meet her at eye level. It was a gesture of equality, Carter realized. A sign that he was taking her seriously. "Ambassador Carter," he said. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting me back. I was not certain you would." Thelvos inclined his head. "Neither were we. There has been much debate among the council members. What we have learned about your species has been difficult to accept." Carter nodded. "I understand. We are very different from you. Different does not begin to describe it." Thelvos gestured to the chamber around him. "Every species in this room evolved on worlds far gentler than yours. We developed civilization because we had time to think, to build, to grow. We never faced the constant struggle for survival that shaped your people." He paused, his large eyes studying her face. "When we founded the Concord, we did so because we were afraid. War had nearly destroyed several of our worlds in the distant past, and we vowed never to let it happen again. We built our union on the principle that violence was never acceptable, that peace was the highest virtue." Carter remained silent, sensing that he had more to say. "But now I wonder if we understood what peace truly meant." Thelvos took a step closer. "We avoided violence because we had to. Our bodies are fragile, our worlds are gentle, our weapons are limited. Peace was not a choice for us. It was a necessity. And you think it is different for humans. I know it is different. You come from a world where everything is trying to kill you. You have evolved to survive poison, predators, extreme temperatures, and physical damage that would end any of us. You have developed weapons that could destroy planets. You have the strength to take whatever you want." He spread his thin hands. "And yet here you are, asking permission to join a community of beings who cannot stop you from doing anything you choose. You sent diplomats instead of soldiers. You brought gifts instead of demands. You apologized for frightening us when you could have simply ignored our fear." Carter felt her throat tighten. "We do not want to frighten anyone. We came here hoping to find friends." "I believe you." Thelvos turned to address the full chamber. "I believe that the humans are sincere in their desire for peace. And I believe that their peace is more valuable than ours precisely because they do not need it." He looked back at Carter. "A species that chooses gentleness when strength is available demonstrates true virtue. A species that seeks friendship when conquest is possible demonstrates true wisdom. You have shown us something we did not understand before, Ambassador. You have shown us that peace is not the absence of the ability to wage war. It is the choice not to." The chamber was completely silent. Carter could feel her heart pounding in her chest. "The Galactic Concord has voted," Thelvos continued. "We would be honored to welcome humanity as a provisional member of our union." Carter blinked. She had prepared herself for rejection, for compromise, for lengthy negotiations. She had not prepared for acceptance. "I do not know what to say," she admitted. "Say that you accept. Say that you will work with us to build understanding between our peoples. Say that you will help us learn to see you as friends rather than fears." Carter felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them back, aware that crying might cause another diplomatic incident. "Humanity accepts," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion beneath it. "We will do everything in our power to earn your trust." Thelvos extended his thin hand. Carter took it gently, conscious of how fragile his bones felt beneath her grip. "Then let us begin," he said. The formal ceremony took place the following day. Ambassador Carter stood before the assembled council and signed the provisional membership agreement, making humanity the 13th species to join the Galactic Concord. The document committed Earth to peaceful relations, fair trade, and mutual defense. In exchange, humanity would have access to technologies that would advance their civilization by centuries. Captain Hayes watched from the gallery, unable to keep the smile from his face. Beside him, Lieutenant Commander Webb wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "We did it," she whispered. "The ambassador did it," Hayes corrected. "We just tried not to scare anyone. We failed at that pretty badly." "Yeah, we did." After the ceremony, there was a reception. It was smaller than the first one, more intimate, with only a few dozen guests. The aliens still kept their distance from the humans, but the fear in their eyes had faded. Now there was curiosity, and even occasional smiles. Coordinator Velrath approached Carter near the refreshment table. The elderly Kathrani moved slowly, her joints stiff with age, but her eyes were bright and alert. "Ambassador, I wanted to thank you personally." "Thank me? For what? For being patient with us. We were not kind to you these past days. We let our fear control us, and yet you remained calm and gracious throughout." Carter shook her head. "You had every reason to be afraid. We showed up and started sneezing and yawning and laughing, completely unaware of how terrifying we must have seemed. I should be thanking you for giving us a chance." Valrath made a sound that might have been a laugh. Perhaps we should simply agree that we all did our best in a difficult situation. I think I can agree to that. High Coordinator Thelvos joined them a few moments later. He had been circulating through the room speaking with various delegates. But he seemed drawn back to the humans again and again. I have one last question before you return to your ship. Of course, the substance you call caffeine. The one that would stop the hearts of most species. I have learned that you consume it every morning, sometimes multiple times per day. I must know why. Carter smiled. It was a genuine smile, unguarded and warm. Because mornings are hard, she said simply. Thelvos stared at her for a moment. Then he made a sound that the translator rendered as laughter. I think I understand you better now than I did yesterday, he said. I look forward to understanding you even more in the years to come. Carter returned to the horizon's edge that evening. The crew was waiting for her in the main corridor, their faces eager and anxious. She kept her expression neutral as she walked toward them, drawing out the moment. Well, Captain Hayes asked, we are now the 13th member species of the Galactic Concord. The corridor erupted in cheers. Crew members embraced each other, laughing and crying and shouting. Someone started a chant that spread through the ship. Voices rising in celebration, Carter stood in the middle of it all, letting the joy wash over her. They had come so close to failure. They had frightened an entire galactic civilization simply by being human. And yet, in the end, that humanity had been their greatest strength. They were predators from a death world. Survivors of a planet that tried to kill them every day. They carried violence in their bones and poison in their blood. But they had chosen peace. They had chosen friendship. And the galaxy had chosen to believe them. It was not the worst. Foundation for a lasting relationship. As the celebration continued around her, Carter quietly slipped away to her quarters. She poured herself a cup of coffee from the pot that was always waiting, and stood by the window, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, a whole galaxy was waiting to meet them. A galaxy that was terrified of them and fascinated by them in equal measure. A galaxy that had just bet its future on the hope that humanity would be what it claimed to be. Carter took a sip of her coffee. Feeling the familiar warmth spread through her chest, they would not let the galaxy down.